Now I've got an interesting dry fly for you today that you're probably not going to find in too many books out there. Now I came across it when flipping through Kenneth Bay's 1979 The American Fly Tyer's Handbook, and the pattern sounded kind of familiar to me, so I started flipping through a dozen or so books in my library that I thought it might have been in, and the only one I found it in was Raymond Scott Stetzer's Flies the Best 1000, published in 1992. Now, Stetzer had it tied a bit differently. First off, he didn't use a wing, and secondly, he used white hackle fibers for a tail instead of, get this, polar bear. But about the original design, it was created by Walter Burr, who, by the way, did not name the pattern after himself. He submitted it to the United Fly Tyers, and their editor of the round table there gave it the name Burr's Bright. And how Burr originally tied it, well, he used polar bear fur for the tail, which I'm assuming was probably easier to get back in the 1960s. Now, I do have a patch of polar bear fur that it was from a bear harvested before 1972, so it's completely legal. But I think most people who would tie this pattern today would probably use white hackle fibers for the tail. And Burr did tie his with a huge fan wing made out of mallard breast feathers, which does have a couple of advantages. First off, it's going to be pretty easy to see, either for the fish or the fisherman. And then second, it might just help you get a better, more delicate presentation. But it also has one pretty major downfall, which is going to be this thing is probably a major tippet twister. So when fishing a fly like this, you're probably not going to want to false cast a lot, and you probably won't be laying it out there at 60 or 70 feet. And I would consider this thing 100% an attractor fly, and Burr said it is a really good low light fly, most effective either right after sunrise or right before sunset. And one more note on Walter Burr. I haven't seen any of his other patterns in any of my books, but I did find a 1973 article in the New York Times that had him listed as a panelist at the Theodore Gordon Fly Fishers Club annual dinner. So maybe he's not a real well-known tyer now, but we know back in the day he hung out with some pretty elite fly fishermen and tyers. So this fly, tippet twister or not, I think it's a pretty cool looking pattern. So there it is in the vise, a Burr's Bright. Now, a pretty cool looking pattern. There's, it's a bit bulky looking, not a typical dry fly. Now I'm tying this on a size 12. It's one extra long barbless dry fly hook. I'll put a base of black thread down to where I'm going to catch in the tail. And for the tail, like I said, I am going to be using this polar bear fur. Of course, if you don't have this, white hackle fibers are going to be just fine. So I'll put about 15 fibers in my stacker. See how that came out. Okay, that's going to work. And let's go about a body length here. Okay, I'm going to keep these in, take my thread up about a third of the way back. I think I've got some loose thread fibers there, but that's okay. We'll bury these guys. Let's take our thread to the back and then put some wax on it. Now the dubbing calls for a fluorescent green wool, or if you don't have any wool, just any dry fly dubbing. This is a super fine. Now I did have a green wool, but it wasn't fluorescent. It wasn't all that bright. And I think one of the key factors of this fly is the bright, the fluorescent part of it. So I would change the material just to keep the color before I would, change the color. So, if you know what I'm saying. I probably didn't say it very eloquently. But let's go ahead and wrap this up. Try not to get a lump, too much of a lump right there. If you can get a taper, that's fine. If not, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Now, one tip on this, it might be easier to catch in the hackle before you catch in this big fan wing. So let's go ahead and catch in our white hackle. So I'm going to catch it in right here. I've stripped off a few extra fibers on the far side, so hopefully they will lay down neater when I make that first wrap. But let your stem go forward, make a few extra wraps right there before you snip this off. Now here's what I think is the coolest part of the fly. Two little slips of mallard breast feathers, just convex sides together. And if you grab the feathers, the stems will splay out on you. So we're going to put maybe 3 wraps right here, not real tight, but then we're going to just kind of pull these down to get that positioned how we want it. And if they're a little long, you can just pull them a little bit shorter. But again, they are pretty long wings. And yes, this is going to be a tippet twister. If I didn't say that in the intro, you're just going to have to live with that fact. So the instructions say, pull the wings forward, and then the stems, catch the stems going back. So I'm trying not to let these wings get too out of position on me right here, but I got the stems going back. Let's do one more wrap to really secure them in the back. And now a few wraps going forward where we're going to finish off our hackle. But before we wrap that hackle, we do have these stems right here to contend with. Okay, I think we're going to be fine right there, and you can kind of use this collar hackle to help position these wings as you wrap it. And I'm going to want to do, I'm thinking 3 wraps behind it, 2 or 3 wraps behind it, and then about the same, maybe 3 or 4 wraps in front of it. Because it really depends on the quality of your hackle. That's 3 wraps right there, and that didn't put down a whole lot of fibers, so I think we might get 4 up front. Okay, let's catch this off and see what it looks like. Okay, before I snip that, I'm just going to kind of pull all these back, and be careful that you don't, pull these wings out of position, but just get those hackle fibers going back a little bit and make enough room for your wet finish right here. Got a couple of fibers going forward that we might want to trim in just a second. So any cleanup on this? Well, I got this excess right here to take care of. And then we'll take care of a couple of these right here. You could singe these or pull them out with your tweezers or just snip them. As long as you can get your tippet up through that eye, you got a fishable fly. So there it is, Burr's Bright, tied in the original style. Pretty nifty looking pattern, certainly fun to tie. So I appreciate you watching, everybody. Y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.